When we talk about those who served in the Second World War, we often bring up the paratroopers, the pilots, the Marines, and the combat engineers, but this time we'll put the spotlight on the medics. During World War I, roughly 8% of wounded American soldiers ended up dying of infection and other causes. But during World War II, that number went down to 4.5%. With more medics around, more men would recover. More units could make a comeback. An army that couldn't be decimated in one shot would be harder to defeat, so the Japanese came up with a new strategy: kill every last medic in sight. The Imperial Japanese Army had three main targets. First, with the officers. If they could shoot down the leaders, the rest of the men would descend into chaos. Next came the flamethrowers. Anyone carrying a flamethrower could deal serious damage to Japanese defenders hiding in caves and pillboxes, so they had to be taken out too. Third were the medics. They gave wounded soldiers a fighting chance, so if Japan wanted to maximize its kill rate, they'd need to get rid of anyone wearing a red cross. The way American medics were treated generally depended on which part of the globe they were deployed to. In the European theater, anyone wearing a red cross was usually treated with respect. Several times, Allied and Nazi medics took turns treating each other's casualties. If a German soldier was injured in battle, an American medic nearby would help. If an American POW had open wounds needing bandages, he could be treated in a German aid station. Well, this wasn't always the case, since unlike the American medics at the time, German medics carried guns. If they fired their weapons, the Allies would have no obligation to protect them. And there were many stories of German machine guns ripping medics in half as they were trying to help. Yet as dangerous as it was, nothing compared to the Pacific Theater, where a Red Cross patch was the equivalent of a bullseye. In Europe, medics got killed just like the other soldiers, but in the fight with Japan, they were singled out as prime targets. It reached a point where medics were ordered to take off the Red Cross insignia for their own protection. You may be wondering why the Japanese didn't adhere to the same ethical code as the rest. Well, there are several factors to be considered. Before the war broke out, 40 countries agreed on a set of standards of conduct for humanitarian relief and treatment of POWs during the Hague International Conference of 1907 and the Geneva Convention of 1929. Japan signed the Geneva Convention but did not ratify it. So, although the Japanese claimed that they would abide by the agreement, historians argue that they were not legally bound to obey that code of conduct. Still, whether or not their actions constituted international war crimes didn't matter to the Imperial Japanese Army. They became notorious for training pilots for suicide missions, eating the flesh of their prisoners, using captured soldiers as live target practice, and raping hundreds of thousands of comfort women multiple times every day. With that in mind, it's not surprising that Japanese soldiers were horrible toward the medics. But don't make the mistake of thinking Japanese didn't have any code of conduct. Well, they did. For them, suicide was preferable to surrender. The more enemies they could shoot down before they died, the better. Stories exist of American medics who were blown to pieces when the wounded Japanese soldier they attempted to save pulled the pin of a grenade. Propaganda was so bad that they believed Americans were cannibals who would torture them, and that it was more honorable to die than risk capture. The unfortunate American medic was just a bonus to add to their kill quota.